How's it going, everyone? Paul with Adaptable Survival. In today's episode, let's talk about your most important shelter when it comes to being outdoors in cold weather. Now, if you've watched the first video in this series, you understand I'm trying to cover, camping, survival when the weather's getting colder out. Call that winter survival, call that cold weather skills, anything like that. I wasn't quite nailed down on what the title of the series is going to be. I wasn't sure if I was going to call it winter skills, camping and survival in cold weather, whatever it is. The more I thought about it, I came to the conclusion that we're going to call it cold weather skills, because anytime the temperature falls below 50 degrees, your main goal is, number one, to stay dry, but also stay warm. Brings me to our most important shelter option in our kit that we're bringing out with us anytime we go outdoors, and that is our clothing. We wear clothes every single day. It protects us from the elements, gives us warmth, gives us, availability of different gear that we carry on us. Lots and lots of different options. In that first video, I kind of broke down the fabric types, that being natural fabrics like wool, cotton, those sorts of things, and synthetics. The differences, pros and cons, those sorts of things, why you would choose one over the other. This episode, we will elaborate on that by looking at a few different layers in how I approach my clothing system, depending on the activity that I'm doing. Because as I mentioned, our activity is going to dictate the gear that we are carrying. Our gear doesn't dictate the activities we're doing. Like I said, not to bring up a lot of military survival or military stuff, but just like the military, the mission dictates the gear, not vice versa. So let me get a tarp down on the ground. I'll get out some of the pieces of clothing that I brought out to me, and we'll start breaking those down layer by layer. All right, so I got the tarp laid out, just a Marine Corps tarp, field tarp, but I have each different layer set out here, from base layers, kind of like your mid layers, pants, out into a puffy layer. So we'll move from my right to the left. So number one, obviously, we're gonna have base layers. Now, this is a -33 expedition weight top. I do have some bottoms. I just didn't bring those out with me because I grabbed a different set of bottoms to talk about a few different properties with these. So these are just outdoor research, merino wool synthetic blend bottoms. The top I have on right now is the same top that goes with this. So typically I just have the top on. Now that might kind of confuse you of why I would just have the base layer top on right now. Temperature wise, it's about 32 degrees, but these Duluth dry on the fly fleece lined pants are why I don't have a base layer bottom on right now. I prefer to run these fleece lined pants. Number one, they dry really, really quickly. But number two, this gives me plenty enough insulation that I'm warm enough, but I also don't get too cold if it's really cold out. It's a nice fine balance. If I find that I'm gonna be out here when it's in probably below 20, that's when I would throw on bottom base layer. A caveat with the base layer, zip open my Perseverance Survival Wooby hoodie here. So hopefully you can see this in the camera, but my base layer top, and even with my bottoms, aren't super tight. The thing you want to do with your base layers is you never want them to act like a compression layer. What's going to happen if you have a layer that is acting like a compression layer, so think of like a compression sock, compression sleeves, those sorts of things, that's going to impede the blood flow because that skin is constricted. Now, my socks, I typically leave Not super loose, but they fit well, just like these tops do. Enough fit to where it can wick that moisture away, but not so tight that it's constricting blood flow. For socks, I didn't bring any socks out here. The socks I have on right now are just some lightweight, darn tough merino wool socks. But for my socks, I typically just stick with merino wool. If I am going out for several days, I'll bring an extra pair and then just stuff the one pair down in my sleep system so it dries overnight. Or if I have a stove with me, then I can dry those out overnight while I switch into a fresh pair. From the base layers, let's hop down to these pants. Now, I've already talked about these Duluth Trading dry on the fly fleece line pants. What I also do, let's say like today, I could probably get away with a base layer in these pants here. Now these pants aren't fleece lined, but these are a soft shell pant. Soft shell pants, jackets are going to be water and wind resistant. They won't be waterproof. Now the big thing you don't want to do with those layers is have those waterproof, because now any body heat you trap, any moisture your body produces is being trapped in your base layer or your mid layer. I like soft shell because it's very durable, depending on how thick it is. I do have another pair of these True Work pants that are a little bit thicker. I think they're T2s. I've used those extensively over the last 2 years. Couldn't be happier with them. I do need to buy a new pair of these because I got a little big, so I need a better fitting pair, but these work really, really well. Soft shells are always my go-to pant for pretty much year round. It just depends on how thick. So I could always partner these with either an Expedition top and bottom or those merino wool synthetic or blend base layers. Now I have used synthetic base layers and they work. They dry very, very quickly, but they can get stinky after a couple of days. I haven't experienced that with the outdoor research. The last 2 hunt camps here in Wisconsin, the last 2 years, I've worn my outdoor research for 3-4 days and they didn't stink at all. So I'm sold on the blends. Doesn't necessarily mean you have to be. Now, moving kind of into more of like our mid layers, our insulation. Obviously, tried and true is the Perseverance Survival Woobie hoodie, Woobie jacket. I've had this one, I don't know, at least 5-6 years, if not a little bit longer than that. This one's really beat up, seen a lot of wear, but I like it because when I'm out hiking, it's not like my new one that is giving me a lot of heat and moisture trapped. That's an upside because now with that jacket I can wear that around town. Let me get situated here so my feet stop hurting me and killing my legs. But I like this one because since I've worn it quite a bit, it's still somewhat water resistant. It keeps me plenty warm, but it's not so it doesn't trap heat so much that if I'm hiking around and sweating that moisture is being trapped. It does allow it to evaporate out eventually. This is a Pendleton 100% wool flannel top. I've used this a ton as kind of like a really light mid layer, top layer on top of a base layer, or just on top of a synthetic t-shirt. It works really well for like the fall, springtime, wintertime. I used that in my winter class a few years back and worked perfectly fine for me. This is just a Polar Tech fleece zip-up jacket. I bought this, I don't know, last spring-ish on a clearance rack for like 12-15 bucks. So super cheap, but it's nice and warm. And when I'm out hiking, if I have this layer on, it keeps me warm enough to where I don't sweat, but I'm not chilled to the bone. The reason I like the Polar Tech is it'll dry quickly if I do happen to get wet. Downside obviously is it's gonna get stinky, but it's more durable than, let's say, a merino wool hoodie, because if you're breaking brush, you snag up a merino wool, just about any kind of fabric in merino wool, it's gonna get chewed up pretty badly. This is just a little bit more durable. So that brings me to this outermost layer. Now this is a puffy jacket and a puffy pant. Let me get situated here so my feet stop killing me. So this jacket, we'll start there, is from a company called Numa Outdoors. I bought this, I actually just got this for a Christmas present. Now, this is a mixture of both Primaloft and down. I don't remember the exact specs on it. I'll throw a link to their site so you can check it out. Excuse me. But the reason I picked this up is, number one, I wanted a puffy layer that can go over everything else that I'm wearing if it gets really cold out or if I'm sitting static. Now, like I talked about in the first episode, synthetics are not the greatest to have around fire, but if you kind of watch it as best you can be perfectly fine. Now, obviously, I've used my Leicester River field jacket a ton. I didn't bring it out of here, just ran out of room in the pack. But I could always switch this puffy layer out with that. But the reason I like the puffy layer is it's going to trap a lot of heat because this is water resistant. And if I were to fall in a creek or get wet for some reason, if I take this out of my pack, throw it on, start moving, or hop in my sleep system, it's going to allow me to, number one, warm up my core temperature, but also dry these layers out because of the synthetic insulation is going to draw from the base layer to the next layer to the next layer until it's on the outside. Now, obviously, there's some steps in that process, and like I said, I will post John Barklow's rewarming drills in the description box below so you can check those out, kind of get a better understanding of why I run a system quite like this. But the upside of this jacket, I got it on a sale for 80 bucks, so not super expensive, but gives me a ton of capabilities and a lot of pocket storage, stuff like that. Now, these puffy pants, and to some of you, these will look familiar. This is the Marine Corps Happy Suit pants. I know the Army has a version. Each branch calls it a little bit something different, but essentially these are just a puffy pant that you would put over whatever you're wearing, whatever kit you're wearing. Now, I've had these for the last couple of years, haven't used them a ton, but the more I started looking into reevaluating my cold weather clothing system, this works as the outermost layer. Now, it gives me another layer of insulation, so when I'm sitting static, I can trap as much body heat as possible because your body is what's keeping you warm. Your clothing are just trapping that warmth. So a common misconception is your clothing keeps you warm to a certain degree, yes, but it's your body heat that's being generated that's keeping you warm. So when you're static, these puffy layers are crucial to trapping that body heat, so you're not letting a lot of it escape. But because these are both synthetic, with the puffy pants also being Primaloft, they will dry very, very quickly if I were to happen to fall in the drink and have to get dry as quickly as possible. All right, so now you might be thinking, hey, you talked about base layers, pants, you know, a secondary top, a mid layer, then your puffy layer. What about footwear? So what I'm wearing right now are the Oboz Bridgers. It is the insulated version. Now, it comes in two different insulations. This is, I think, the 400, and it comes in a 600. It could be 200 and 400, I can't remember. I'll throw the specs across the screen. But I like having an insulated hiking boot versus something like a muck boot or a bogs. I've used those in the past. The big downside with those is your mobility suffers because of just how that boot is designed. It's really designed to be trekking through, you know, ankle high water, maybe mid-calf deep water, not really meant to be hiking around the woods and doing all sorts of stuff like that. So that's why I went to these Bridgers. I do have to jump up in a size. The problem I've ran into with these is more so when I'm sitting in my stand during hunting. If I try to put a toe warmer in there, it just takes up too much space, and in the end it just causes my feet to get colder than they really should be. So that's something how I talked about with wearing layers, a base layer or socks that act like a compression sleeve. It's going to reduce the blood flow because of that skin is compressed. So you want to try and avoid that as much as possible. Do your research with footwear. You know, this is just what works for me. If bogs and muck boots work for you, great and grand. But for me, just that lack of mobility with those, because they're a little bit clunky, is not a big upside for me personally. I like to have as much mobility as possible while still staying effective for whatever environment that I am in. All right, so we ran through the various layers from base layers to the puffy layer like I have on now. Since I am static, it's a little bit chilly out here since it is around freezing. I just threw it on. This is my first test run with this out in the woods, so I kind of want to see how warm I get with this on. We talked about footwear, you know, an insulated hiking boot versus something like a muck boot or a bogs, why I personally like one over the other. Like I said, this clothing system is really just what works for me, what I find to be the most versatile. And what sold me on using more synthetics versus more merino wool, number one, I can save a little bit of weight, especially once you start getting to more of those outer layers. But as I talked about with the John Barklow rewarming drills that he speaks of, if I were to fall in the water, I could pull this puffy layer out of my jacket if it's colder out, or whatever insulating layer I have, pull that out, throw that on, start hiking if I'm doing more of the dynamic rewarming drill. If I'm doing more of the static rewarming drill, I can set up whatever shelter I have, my sleep system, put my puffy layers on after I kind of get as much of that water off me as I can, hop inside, start getting hot liquids, getting food in me, and start firing up that internal combustion of your body. Your body's what's generating heat. Anytime you eat food, when it's breaking down those macros, you know, protein, carbs, and fats, it's going to generate energy and generate body heat. Now, something I haven't spoken to quite yet is neck gaiters, buffs, and then gloves. As you can see, I don't have a buff or a neck gaiter with me. I don't use those a whole lot just because I don't like a lot of stuff around my neck. But I do have a set of gloves on me. Now, these are just a set of gloves I got from REI since I work there. Picked them up because these are actually windproof gloves, and I can still use my phone with these on. Now, these are fleece lined, so if these were to get wet, you know, stuff them in my jacket, stuff them in my sleep system, dry them out fairly quickly. But I also do use some fingerless wool liners. Let me grab those out of my pack here. So just a set of these fingerless gloves. I mean, everyone has seen these. You can get these relatively cheap. I think I maybe spent $5, maybe $10 buying these off of eBay or something a couple of years ago. And these work perfectly fine for me. If I want a little bit more dexterity, then I just keep these on hand. Now, anytime you start bringing up gear and things like that, everyone's going to have an opinion on it. I tell people, you know, whatever I'm showing you, this is what works for me personally off of the research I've done, the versatility I want in my gear. Am I saying, hey, go sell all your wool stuff and go buy all synthetic? By no means, because I bounce between the two. It all depends what I'm planning to do. Am I backpacking in 5, 10, 15 miles in the dead of winter? I'm probably going to bring synthetics since they're lighter, and they're going to offer me a little bit more versatility in getting dry. Now, one thing I haven't really talked to is the down that's in this jacket. That's something I'm curious about. A lot of down nowadays is being treated so it's water resistant. Not going to be waterproof because it eventually will get wet, but a lot of it is waterproof or water resistant. So anytime you're using natural versus synthetics, there's going to be pros and cons. But we're talking specifically clothing, I like synthetic just because it's going to dry much quicker than merino wool or some sort of wool outerwear. Not saying those are bad, it's just picking the right tool for the job, let's say. Now, in the description box below, I will throw links to this jacket if you're interested in that. If you're interested in those rewarming drills, I'll post that down there as well. This is just really meant to get you thinking. really looking at your clothing system and thinking about it critically. Now, this is definitely very contradictory to a lot of what survival schools teach, what the bushcraft gods say is gospel, and so forth and so on. You know, if I fall in the water with these rewarming drills, it makes more sense to get as much water off, get my layers, my puffy layers on, getting my sleep system, or just start hiking and moving until I start getting dry again, because those synthetics are going to offer me that availability to dry out, versus trying to start a fire. Because if I'm wet from, let's say, my neck down, you know, you're going to start losing dexterity in your digits very, very quickly. Do I want to fumble around and try and get a fire started, try and string up a tarp, or do I want to do something that's going to address that and mitigate those circumstances quicker? I'll leave it up to you to figure out which makes sense to you. This just offers me another option. You know, I could start a fire if I wanted to, or I could throw these layers on, hop into a sleep system, or start hiking and dry out and stay warm that way. Now, in the comment section down below, let me know what kind of cold weather clothing system you're using. What are some of your go-to items, whether that's jackets, you know, base layers, things like that. I always look forward to seeing what you guys talk about down in the comment section down below. Sorry, having a little brain fart here. Seeing some squirrels fight off in the background there is kind of distracting me, going ADD brain. But also do me the favor, hitting like, subscribe, and sharing. That support means the world to me. I'm not trying to be the next, you know, bushcraft superstar or anything crazy. I'm just trying to share my knowledge here, and that support goes a long way in helping not only me, but all of us learn together. As always, this has been Paul with Adaptable Survival. Adapt your mind, your body, and your gear.